Excellencies, the Ambassador of Ukraine to Austria, Vasyl Khymynets, the Ambassador of Switzerland to Austria, Salome Meyer, dear distinguished panelists, Ambassador of Canada in Austria, Troy Lulashnyk, Ambassador of Latvia in Austria, Guna Japiņa, Mr. Chairman of the Austrian Political Science Association, Professor Robert Schuett, Mr. Roger Hilton, dear members of the Diplomatic Corps, dear professors and students of the Diplomatic Academy, ladies and gentlemen, also online, welcome. It's a particular pleasure for me to welcome you today at our conference, Ukraine's 10-point peace formula, Power or Powerless, which we have organized in cooperation with the Embassy of Ukraine and with the very active club of our alumni of the Diplomatic Academy. The war of Russia against Ukraine began more than 2 years ago, but the aggression from Russia against Ukraine has started, in fact, already much earlier with the occupation of Crimea by Russia in 2014. Austria has always supported Ukraine and is one of the top donors among the 40 states that provide massive help to Ukraine. The bilateral aid of Austria to Ukraine amounts today at 240 million euros. To this number, we have to add all the services given to Ukraine by the Austrian Länder, by the many Austrian municipalities, by the different NGOs, the care given to the 70,000 Ukrainians living in Austria, as well as the amount that Austria pays via the EU budget to Ukraine. The sum of all this help, Austrian help to Ukraine, amounts then to approximately 2 billion euros today. And this number will increase certainly, considering all the help which Ukraine will need till the end of the war and in the reconstruction phase after the war. At the Diplomatische Akademie Wien, we have also always shown our support for Ukraine by organizing many conferences and panels, either specifically on Ukraine or on, with conferences, academic programs or seminars, showing the importance of respecting the international law and by expressing our support and solidarity with the people in Ukraine in their wish to be part of the world of free and sovereign democracies. War has lasted already much too long, and it's indeed right to start to think now about peace, about the time after the war. Today, a big conference about the reconstruction in Ukraine is taking place in Berlin. And in a few days, Switzerland will organize a big conference in the Bürgenstock resort at the Vierwaldstätter See. The moment is more than timely to discuss tonight, also here in Vienna at the Diplomatische Akademie Wien, Ukraine's 10-point peace formula and the expected outcome of this conference in Switzerland. I assume that the conference will demonstrate a clear support for Ukraine and a start for a peace process, which includes security guarantees. I'm particularly honored to pass now the floor to Ambassador Vasyl Khymynets, Ambassador of Ukraine in Austria, who is working tirelessly and successfully for the support of Ukraine and for the Ukrainians in Austria, followed then by the address of Ambassador Salome Meyer, Ambassador of Switzerland in Austria, via screen. I wish you all an interesting evening then with our great panelists. Thank you. Ambassador.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I would start with extending my warm appreciation to the organizers for the opportunity to address you on the 839th day of the large-scale war launched by Russia against Ukraine. Our current discussion should not have taken place if the international order based on the principles of the UN, as well as sacred tenets of the international law, had functioned properly. Because the international global community, guided and led by these principles, failed to prevent the Russian aggression. Where else, as not in the Diplomatic Academy, a respected institution in which the concept of diplomacy has a real meaning, should we emphasize that the unprecedented and brutal war of Russia against Ukraine is a vivid example of the fact that the bodies which are built to prevent any international conflicts are not effective. To any one of us comes to mind the UN as the main relevant international body. I allow myself to remind the main tasks of the UN. It refers to maintaining international peace and security by all possible available means. Russia uses the failures and ineffectiveness of the international order fully by waging a war of aggression. It shows an example to another countries and stakeholders that by violating the international principles, in particular the international law, it can be accepted and tolerated. Moreover, it can be done unpunished. We witness it since 2014. It started in Ukraine with Crimea. By the way, I just mentioned that UN lacks of effectiveness. We should not be surprised, bearing in mind that Russia itself still keeps its seat in the UN Security Council illegally. Just look into the chapter, Article 23. You will not find Russia as a permanent member. As for me, there is a reason why the UN system lost its authority and credibility. Dear friends, every one of us aspires after peace, but sustainable, fair, and solid one. But not a ceasefire which Russia used to strengthen its military capabilities for further aggression. We experience it fully negatively since 2014. There were more than 200 rounds of negotiations which didn't lead to the aspired peace. Ukraine and Ukrainians aspire a sustainable and fair peace more than anyone else. The way towards such a peace can be through the victories on the battlefield. Ukraine keeps defending itself successfully. The aggressor, which is supposed to be considered as second strongest military power, failed to gain the upper hand. All Ukrainians count gratefully on the further military assistance, which will be timely and in due amounts. At the same time, we don't decline a political process. And this political process envisages involvement of the entire world. So far, it deals not only with the war against Ukraine. It deals with the challenge for global security architecture. This architecture is to be based on principles and rules. we don't invent nothing new. We just want to make effective the existing mechanisms. We can manage to fix these mechanisms only by joint efforts. If we succeed, it paves a way to the end of the war in Ukraine. It will restore justice and principles of UN Charter as a condition to avoid future wars and crises. With this end in view, the President of Ukraine submitted to the international community his vision, named Peace Formula of 10 concrete points. This peace formula is grounded on the principles of the UN Charter and in the international law. Restoring peace in Ukraine would mean restoring of these principles. In a few days, the international community, in response to the peace formula of the President Zelensky, will launch this process. It deals with the Global Peace Summit in Switzerland. Why is the Peace Summit considered to be a crucial event? A broad majority of countries will get together to declare their commitments to the UN principles and the international law. In such a way, an international platform will be set up to lay foundations for completing of aggressive by its nature war of Russia against Ukraine, overcoming all consequences caused by this war, and what is important, restoring of the international law. That is why the main goal of this summit is to restore principles of the international law which will be able to protect any country facing with aggression. All these countries acknowledge that such an approach should prevail in the international relations. It sounds like all logical and clear. However, we are facing strong resistance. You might guess that it comes from Russia, from aggressor. The Kremlin admits that this summit is ruining the diplomatic framework which Russia was willing to construct on the international arena. As everyone could come to awareness that Russia was never truly interested in prevailing of the international law. That is why we have to realize there are strong attempts by Russia and Putin to undermine the peace summit. Failing to undermine it, Russia makes it all possible to discredit its image by decreasing number of participants and level of representation. Just imagine, some countries, in particular of the Global South, keep receiving direct threats, forcing them to abstain. Last but not the least, why was Russia not invited? The answer is obvious, because it's an aggressor internationally recognized. Because Russia is boycotting and thwarting all constructive endeavors. We can witness it in the UN and other international organizations. The Global Summit doesn't need boycotting and quarrels. The summit needs constructive discussions for global peace and security in the future. Dear friends, I can assure you the summit will take place definitely. As of today, there are more than 100 countries willing to participate. And it will bring tangible outcomes. First of all, our plan is to focus mainly on 3 points of the peace formula. nuclear security, food security, and returning of illegally displaced Ukrainian children. We are confident that the summit will be able to reach the breakthrough and create good conditions for discussion of another topics of the formula. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is able of forcing Russia to peace and to abide by international security rules. Russia has nothing to oppose to the majority of the world. Despite all Putin's lies, he is dependable of his entourage in the broadest meaning. Also of the international environment. No one in the world is interested in this war except the aggressor itself, and everyone really is aware of it. The Peace Summit is perceived as a forum that will not allow Putin to deceive anymore. And without deception, he would fail. His policy turns out to be a disaster for himself and for the country he leads. Therefore, Ukraine highly appreciates the efforts of all our partners who stand by us with the arranging of the summit and thus exerting their leadership so that true peace, fair and sustainable, becomes closer. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, dear participants, thank you to the Diplomatic Academy for organizing today's event. For over 2 years, Russia has been waging a war of aggression against Ukraine. Every day, the people of Ukraine live through the horrors of this war with great resilience. Russia's actions constitute serious violations of the prohibition of the use of force and the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine as enshrined in international law. Switzerland condemns Russia's actions in the strongest terms and stands in solidarity with Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, the sanctity of international law concerns us all, and thus the war in Ukraine is of global concern. It is in everyone's interest that the global community returns to stability and that international law is respected. For all these reasons, Switzerland has agreed to the request of President Zelensky to host the first summit on peace in Ukraine. In less than a week, leaders from over 90 nations from all corners of the world, as well as international organizations, will gather in Bürgenstock, Switzerland, with the vision to inspire a future peace process and produce practical steps for a framework towards such a process. To realize this vision, the summit seeks to achieve 3 objectives, which have been broadly consulted and jointly defined between participating states. These objectives are, first, to create a common understanding among as many states as possible and at the highest political level for a comprehensive, just and durable peace in Ukraine, based on the UN Charter. Also, to provide a platform for high-level discussions on a possible peace process for Ukraine, focusing notably on topics of global interest such as nuclear security, food security and freedom of navigation, and also humanitarian aspects. And finally, to initiate a process towards peace, notably by discussing for the very first time how to involve both parties in a future peace process. Switzerland, as a neutral country, has a long tradition of promoting dialogue. Thus, we consider the exchange of different views on the way to a comprehensive, just and durable peace in Ukraine of vital importance. The Conference on Peace in Ukraine is not yet that path, but it holds the ambition to draft a concrete roadmap towards that path. I wish you all an interesting and insightful discussion tonight.
It's great to be here. So for everybody, I'm Roger Hilton, a student from the Diplomatic Academy maybe 1,000 years ago, who's a member of club.da, and I'm working for GlobeSec in Bratislava as a defense fellow. As I said earlier, it's really so encouraging to see so many people here, because, most importantly, President Putin doesn't want you here, and as Ambassador Khymynets said, he doesn't want anybody at the Peace Summit. So I'm so thankful on behalf of the panelists that you're all here right now. The events taking place in Switzerland next week will really be a barometer for so many events to come, where the one event that will happen next week will set the standards for so many different situations. So it's such a privilege for me to be moderating a panel with such a distinguished panel, to get ahead of the ideas, to hear what is feasible and what's not possible, and most importantly for people in the audience to be involved. We want to hear what you say. So before we get started and I go through the panelists, I just want to remind everybody that if you go to slido.com and you log in using the hashtag, you'll be able to leave your questions there early, which we're going to start collecting. We're on a bit of a tight time frame, so we're going to try to make this as successful as the Ukrainian counteroffensive in 2022 that took Kherson back. So everybody buckle up and let's get going on it. So representing Latvia is Ambassador Guna Japiņa, who has been in Vienna since 2021. In addition to her ambassador role in Austria, she's also accredited in Liechtenstein, Slovakia, and Switzerland. She's a lawyer by education with a special focus on civil law and legal philosophy. She's been working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Latvia since 1997 and has professional experience in legal, consular, and EU policy issues. She was head of the consular service and has been awarded with the state honor for repatriation efforts and the support provided to Latvian nationals during the COVID-19 pandemic. Sveki, thank you much for being here, Ambassador.
Thank you.
It's great to see another Canuck on the panel. So representing Canada is Ambassador Troy Lulashnyk, who is the permanent representative to the international organizations in Vienna and ambassador to Austria and Slovakia. He joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade in 1999 and has since held an assortment of positions, including Director of Global Partnership Programs, where he helped manage the Cold War legacy of weapons and materials of mass destruction and related expertise in the former Soviet Union from 2002 to 2006, among things. And abroad, he served as Canada's ambassador to Ukraine from 2011 to 2014. And from 2014 to 2017, he served as Canada's ambassador to Egypt. So great to have you on the panel, Mr. Ambassador. And rounding out the panel is Dr. Robert Schuett, chair of the Austrian Political Science Association. He's a prolific author, with his last publication, Hans Kelsen's Political Realism, being released in 2021. So folks, I hope everybody's ready to go. We're ready to go here. I see some encouraging things to get going. So as I said, when leaders meet next week, everybody, they will be looking for a consensus on how to find a long-lasting and secure peace for Ukraine. And for all of the history students out here, who've been studying with Professor Rowe, learned about Metternich and the Concert of Europe, peace and what it means in 2024 is considerably different than what it was back then. So as an opening salvo for everybody and for our audience, what are the foundational elements of peace in the 21st century, according to you, Madam Ambassador?
First of all, hi, Roger. I'm really happy to see you here in Vienna, because we met several times in Bratislava. I'm actually very happy that, representatives of or from GlobeSec are here in Vienna, so we can really continue our cooperation. And thank you also for organizing this event, because as we know, this Ukraine Peace Initiative is the only one with such a big, broad global support, and actually we have no one others. And therefore this event and this summit also in Bürgenstock is of such a big importance, not only for Ukraine, but also for you, for me, for all of us. And so thank you. And actually it's also, this event gives us the opportunity to discuss this topic in, let's say, more broad context. And that's the point, actually. Thank you also for your first question. But my answer to the first question would be quite brief, I would say, quite short, but 3 points. The first one is, so let's say 3 preconditions for the peace in 21st century, kind of this, put this way. The first one is exactly the one criteria that has been already mentioned by, I would say, all speakers until now. And it means international law, rules-based order and international law. My Ukrainian colleague mentioned already, yes, there are gaps of implementation, let's say, of the law, and we will talk about it later on. But the point is that the basis is still the same. And we remember that actually the most, let's say, most important pillar of this international law is the Charter of United Nations, made in 1946, immediately after the Second World War, to avoid the new war. It's still, actually, we are in the same point now, on the same point now, and the charter is still in peace, still in force, still valid, still legit, still in force. Also, principle of national sovereignty, of territorial integrity, and so on, so on. Those principles are still in force. If all countries would respect those principles in international law and Charter of United Nations, it would be no need for Ukraine summit. I think it's very, very clear. The second point, or second precondition, is actually to recognize that we are responsible now. We are experiencing history since 2 years and still now, but we are also making history. We are experiencing history and making history by ourselves. It's our common responsibility not to lose a clear view. We must not to lose our clear view how the things, let's say, should develop and how the future shall look like. It means, what I want to say by this, that we should have clear view who is the aggressor and who is the victim. And without any, wie man sagt auf Deutsch, wenn und aber. And the third and last point is that the summit will be not a negotiation format. It's just a very, very first step for very, very long process that hopefully lead to beginning of negotiations between the two parties, but on the later stage, not now. And this peace must be comprehensive, just, and lasting. And of course, we all know that no one wants peace in Ukraine more than Ukraine and Ukrainians. And therefore, please don't, and this is my last point, please don't talk on behalf of Ukraine. Just, I think we should listen what Ukrainians need. We should trust Ukraine's opinion, how the peace within Ukraine should look like. Just let's cooperate, support Ukraine, but don't think instead of Ukraine. They know what the country needs. Thank you.
Well, obviously, Madam Ambassador, Latvia has been one of the strongest supporters of Ukraine, and everything that you said is a great sort of opening salvo. It's painting the picture. Let's move down the aisle, Mr. Ambassador. Your colleague here from Latvia, friends in EFP, NATO battle group, she's shared her views. What does peace mean to you in 2024, and what does it look like?
Thanks very much, and really wonderful to be here. Of course, I'll just reinforce and amplify what was just said. Our system is predicated on respect for international law. And when you do not respect international law, we have a very serious problem. Ukraine has a catastrophe, but it's everyone's catastrophe. And so it is critical that territorial integrity, sovereignty, independence are respected. These are the core laws and the normative basis for all of our security, all of our safety, and all of our peace. So peace must be predicated on these concepts that are legally enshrined. And I have to salute the ambassador and the Ukrainian people. They have shown such extraordinary courage and fortitude for over 2 years, and it has been unbearable, and that's an understatement. And so we need to support Ukraine in every way that we can, and Canada is doing this because Russia does not respect international law, to say the least, and it will not stop unless in its calculus it is too costly to continue. And so that is why we must support, we must buttress Ukraine and do everything we can. And I'll just say from Canada's perspective, we are all in. That means $14 billion to Ukraine since this war started. It's military, humanitarian, it's security support, it's financial support. We are all in. We are training more Ukrainians, I think, than any other country, because this is the way we can help Ukraine stand against this unbearable attack of aggression. We have also helped, like Europe has helped Ukrainians that are fleeing this violence, and we have accepted 240,000 Ukrainians in Canada. For a free visa, 3 years, they come and we settle them and we welcome them. And it is most unfortunate that they have to leave their country and their families and their traditions and their home. But until we get this resolved, we will be with them, we will stand with them, and we will help all of our Ukrainians. We also need to demonstrate to Russia, not only will Russia not succeed, but Russia needs to be held accountable for the catastrophic and atrocious atrocities that have been conducted over the last 2.5 years, and we're working vigorously on to that end. I'd also say we have high hopes for the peace plan, and we can talk about that tonight, but very, very active on nuclear, very, very active on the return of Ukrainian children, and a couple other points of the peace plan. Thanks.
Well, Ambassador, thank you so much for sharing maybe a message that doesn't make tips so often, Canadian foreign security policy. So thank you so much for doing that. No pressure, Dr. Schuett. You got the real transatlantic view. Canada, G7, Latvia, one of the greatest supporters.
Okay.
You're a non-resident professor here. What does peace look like in 2024?
Okay. I think so. First of all, thank you for the invite, Roger. Thanks for the question, and of course I echo everything what's been said so far. I think, from my point of view, the foundational elements of peace are what they have always been, and the history of political and legal philosophy, in a way gives you two basic answers to that very question: how to ensure peace. One is peace through law, most commonly associated and most eloquently articulated, I think, by Hans Kelsen, of course. And what peace through law means is that you should create an international order that has a centralized, coercive body at its center that can keep the peace. Basically, what you would need to create to ensure peace is some kind of world police. This is obviously what, after the Second World War, we didn't do. So we created something differently. And in absence of such a peace through law, where there's a coercive body that can keep the peace, we have to deal in a way with this kind of second idea in the history of political thought, and that is peace through diplomacy. This is most commonly associated with people like Hans Morgenthau, Henry Kissinger, of course. And what peace through diplomacy means is, in absence of peace through law, that it pretty much, whether we like it or not, keeping the peace falls squarely within the realm of great powers. These great powers, however, thinking of Kissinger, of course, they need to do two things. First of all, they need to create a balance of power among them and for the international society, and they have to work towards a shared understanding of what is legal and legitimate behavior in international society. So basically, they have to be responsible powers. Now we know, of course, Russia is not really responsible power. So in absence of peace through law, we get to peace through diplomacy, and of course, the responsibility for peace lies primarily with great powers. What's new then, to ask the question, in the 21st century, the only bit I think that's new is what the English school calls deep pluralism. And when you think of power, the balance of power and legitimacy, what you see is that especially the global south is ever more assertive in making the case that they've got power too, and they want to wield power within the international society, and they have different notions of legality and legitimacy, unfortunately. So the basic point is, once we're left with peaceful diplomacy, we have to recognize in some ways that the global south plays a greater role than it used to be. And of course, this is what the summit in Switzerland reflects fairly well, because they get invited to bring them in to ensure the peace, or a path to peace in a way.
All right, so elements of old, elements of new. Before moving on to the next question, any responses from the Diplomatic Corps on what Professor Schuett said? No, great. Well, I can see that the audience is hungry, so we have 10 questions. Don't worry. We'll get to them later, but thank you so much for the engagement and getting involved. You think you have a break, Professor Schuett, but you don't. We're going to go back to you right away. We're in 2024. We have a better idea of what peace looks like, but what's new versus the times of Metternich and everybody from the past is everything now more than ever has never been more interconnected. And you know, the speeches about what happens in Ukraine matters for Taiwan, or what happens in Syria matters in the Sahel. So basically, you know, for our audience and for our viewers who are watching on the live stream, what are the consequences of allowing Russia to act with impunity in Ukraine for other international actors abroad?
Okay, thanks again. I think it matters, of course. It's a trivial statement to make. It matters greatly. I think from a realist point of view, it matters gravely in a way on at least three different levels. One is what I would call is the state level. My fear is that there's a really realistic possibility that once we allow Russia to act with impunity, that Ukraine, sorry that I say that, will die a slow death over the years. I can't see any prospect of having a, so to say, an Eastern Russian version of Ukraine and a Western Ukraine living peacefully side by side. Frozen conflict, I think, for decades to come. That's my fear number one. On a regional level, that's the second bit. I would say Black Sea instability, which touches upon the question of food security, of course. I mean, we have, of course, the Black Sea traditionally has been, you know, the bridge between North and South, East and West. We have the EU in that neighborhood, Turkey, Ukraine, Russia, and Georgia. Okay, so the many states have stakes in that region, and I can't see when Russia is allowed to blackmail all these neighbors through military force that you will see stability. You will see the contrary. I fear. And on a third level, which brings me in a way towards the Taiwan issue, but I want to at this stage give you a further broader roundup. I think on a global level, and again, sorry to be so blunt, I think if we allow that, if we allow the present Russian government to act with impunity, the United Nations kind of world order that we've come to appreciate since the end of the World War, and which has kept the peace relatively well, I would say, over the decades, is de facto dead. The reason being very simply, if the international community is neither capable of or unwilling, for whatever reason, to stop the war and also to allow the Russian government to get away with this, I can't see that the UN Charter carries unfortunately carries such a great legal or moral weight any longer. And these three fears are the ones that worries me most, actually.
I mean, I think the legitimacy of the UN and the Security Council have already been mentioned multiple times by President Zelensky, who's made it clear that it's somewhat farcical that a country that's invaded another country has a veto of it. Before we move on, Mr. Ambassador, do you have any comments to, you know, Canada, Pacific, Arctic nation, second largest country in the world, subtle drop? What does it mean for Ukraine, for world politics?
I mean, obviously, from a national perspective, we have Russia kind of up north further there, and we're kind of concerned about their actions, to say the least. But I would say more broadly, I think if we look at the system, yes, the UN has had a very, very challenging time, and I'm at the UN every single day, and it is getting worse every single day. And Russia and others are seeking to change the system to cultivate it in their interests or destroy it. And it's easier to destroy cooperation than it is to cultivate and inculcate cooperation. And so we are seeing this quite significantly. And we enjoyed earlier, well before the invasion even of Crimea, cooperation. There was competition, but there was also a degree of cooperation among states, and that enabled us to accomplish things. Right now, the system is bifurcating or descending, and we have a very serious global problem where you have Russia and China and others saying, the system doesn't work for us, we want to change it, we want to remake it. And Ukraine is one massive and catastrophic example of that situation. Now, I'm not as pessimistic, and I would say even in the Cold War, while it was perhaps simpler because we have many different players now, we did find ways to function and deconflict. So I am hopeful that despite the ferocious and vicious pursuit of national interests, we can find things that are in common and find a way through this. And the peace conference is one step towards that goal of moving us together in the same direction.
Well, Madam Ambassador, your counterpart said, Canada has Russia to worry about up north and we don't like it. You unfortunately don't have that luxury where they're right on your doorstep. So from your perspective, again, what does, what is happening in Ukraine mean for a much greater global security landscape?
I would say it's not a privilege or how you described it. It's, let's say, a sad advantage to explain maybe the situation. Being a Latvian investor here in Vienna, really, I would like to put this in a most, let's say, a longer time perspective regarding both in past and also future. Because as we know, Baltic countries were the only countries after the Second World War that did not get the opportunity to regain their independence after the Second World War. And therefore, instead of this, we had 50 years of under totalitarian regime that took hundreds of thousands of lives and destinies, and it was very, very bad experience. But actually, I think that unfortunately, Homo sapiens had this trend to learn just from bad experience, unfortunately. And therefore, it's also a direct answer, my direct answer to your question, what the consequences could be if the Russia will be not, let's say, punished. I think it's actually very easy that if the offense goes unpunished, it's direct invitation to do more. So easy as that. And actually we see that what's going on in Ukraine is direct consequences of the situation or of the fact that the Soviets were not punished for the Soviet crimes made. So easy as that.
Yeah. Ambassador, before we go on to the next one, just to confirm, it was the Wells Declaration where the United States didn't recognize the annexation of the Baltic states.
Yes.
And
I'm not talking about political positions.
Yeah.
Of course, if no political positions would be there, it would be also not possible to regain the independence in the 1990s. I'm not talking about, let's say, political statements and general policy, but the fact is, I can say very, very let's say, from my familiar experience, and many people say so, that actually during the war and after the Second World War, immediately after the war, many people said, oh, the Brits will come immediately and will save us, or so on. And no, and it took time. 50 years.
Right, and I think that's a great point for everybody in the audience, that the independence that Czechoslovakia had and Romania, that was never afforded to the Baltic states, so it's really important that we were able to bring that up. You've got us going, everybody on the panel is 14 questions. We're hungry for knowledge here. One word you said, Madam Ambassador, which was great, was punishment. How to hold, Russia accountable at the moment. So I'll open it up now to see if we have any takers on it. But in the absence of peace, which is the process in which we're all, hoping for right now and that Ukraine justly defines, as the conflict continues, what are the options available either on the legal and financial level to hold Russia accountable? So if anybody wants to open up, go for it, or...
Well, I'll just say there are a whole myriad of mechanisms. So the ICC, of course, there's the OSCE Moscow mechanism. You have the Council of Europe. There's even talk of a special tribunal to deal with crimes of aggression that we're working through. So there, on the accountability side, I think everyone recognizes. Not only is it aggression, but it's the way in which that aggression has been operationalized on the ground has been tragic and horrific. And so there is a very keen awareness, just as was said, accountability for actions is critical. And upholding international law, upholding the Geneva Convention. These are fundamental precepts of everything that we stand by as a community, as a global society, and we must do that. And then on top of the accountability, the whole issue of reparations and the issue of the economic cost for Russia. I think if we look at the capital flight, their economy, their GDP was quite low even before they had this horrible invasion. And now, I'm not saying they're going to collapse, but they have been, economically harmed, and they will continue to diminish as a result of this over the medium and long term. So these are costly mistakes on the part of the Russians.
Any response?
Yeah. Please.
Thank you. If I may, so in general, I would echo that. But in general, I guess legal and economic financial means. Of course, I think the international community should support Ukraine's defense efforts by all means. Point one, and should apply maximum pressure on Russia through legal means, diplomatic means, and financial means, of course, but also trying to engage with Russia as much as possible. It was mentioned a special tribunal as one way of holding Russia's action or Russian government accountable. From my side, that would be a resounding yes. I can't see any reason. Why not to do it. To me, this is a question of political will. There's no legal nor any moral ambiguity in this war of aggression. That's very clear. It's a textbook example, I think, of an illegal war and also war crimes on a massive scale, as the ambassador has pointed out, seem to be well documented. So, special tribunal, point one, obviously lawyers have to work out the fine bits and the details, how to do it. But they should. On the financial front, I think it has been recently agreed by the United States, France, and the Germans that they use the profits from frozen assets, mainly in Europe. And again, to me, that seems not only a legitimate course of action, but also one that is clearly within European Union and international law. So there's a legal base for that, and there's a legitimate base to use these profits and give them Ukraine and help them defend themselves.
Madam Ambassador?
Yeah. So you mentioned, Mr. Schuett, the legal discussions, and actually, I want to tell the public something about those legal discussions. There is a core group including approximately 40 different countries and international organizations, also European Commission from all the countries are all around the world, presenting different geographical regions. And they cooperate since several months to establish a mechanism, a legal mechanism of punishment. And actually, I think it's exactly as you said, the ICC is responsible for crimes of war. But this is just 50% of the problem, let's say. The second half is about the punishment of the Troika for the crime of aggression as such. And this is, let's say, the problem, because we have no such precedent, exactly as we are facing now, both in legal and, let's say, political means. And therefore, this is the point I said at the very beginning, that we are making history. And it was mentioned many times, several times tonight, that the international law system is not efficient. And this is exactly the gap we should fulfill now. And those discussions within the core group are very, very complicated. Yes, I fully agree, political will is necessary. It's the precondition number one. Yes, because maybe you are also a lawyer, we know it's good to have a political will. But I'm very happy that during last weeks, there are really a good steps toward the solution. It means the consensus has been made that this special tribunal shall be or could be established under auspices of Council of Europe. And this is really, let's say, a good progress. It means we are moving in the right direction. So Ambassador Lulashnyk said that actually maybe during the Cold War the situation was more easy. Fully agree, but the main point is that the most difficult and complicated situation is from one Stagnationspunkt zu einem anderen, when we are establishing new system. And this is exactly what we are doing now. So let's stick together.
All right. Well, it's great that you've brought up the special tribunal, which I think is news for a lot of people. So thank you for broadening our horizons on that. And it's more important that we've made progress on the legal issue. And as you said, for everything, we're learning as we're going, because the scale of the problem, the holding them accountable on a legal standpoint or even the financial is really unprecedented. There are so many questions, 22, so congratulations to our panelists. You're really getting it going. One last question I have before we open it up to the audience. We'll take live questions, and for everybody in the audience who'd like to ask a question, please wait for the microphone so that the viewers watching can watch it live. Dr. Schuett, one question is, when it comes to the seizure of the assets, the EU and, let's say, the North American partners have not necessarily been in lock and step. The Treasury Department under Janet Yellen has really come up with some interesting policies about not just using the interest, but also using the total capital for larger loans. As you said, you see a very clear argument legally for why this is. Without naming names, there have been some European diplomats who have said that this sets a dangerous precedent. The G7 is coming up. Do you think that we're moving towards this direction, or that we'll start much smaller on whether it's the interest strategy?
Okay, hard to say. My hunch is following President Biden's visit to France over D-Day, that the French and the Americans have reached an agreement on those profits. I know, of course, as you point out very clearly, the American position has been, why not go bigger? Of course, and open up the pot if you wish. And some European countries have said, okay, there's a legal issue, but maybe, and let's be honest, there's also, I guess, some domestic politics and economics at play, of course. But what is to be expected, of course, if we go down that route, or if the West goes down that route, is that, of course, the Russians will retaliate in kind. And of course, this is a thing. What I might quote Henry Kissinger here. Of course, whatever you do in foreign policy or strategy, you have to have domestic political support for this. And I guess on the European side, that support to go all in on this kind of money front and open up this whole roughly 300 billion euros / dollars. This is what some countries on the European side fear, and my hunch would be that this is not going to change in the near term. But then, of course, this is the beauty of diplomacy, in a way.
Diplomacy matters, right?
Diplomacy matters, and you can never know in what direction these things go, and maybe we are headed in that direction. I guess we'll see. I think Switzerland will be one indicator also for that question.
Any responses, or want to head over to the Q&A right now?
I just say we're very keen to have, to push this further, and as part of holding Russia accountable, we need to address this. And it is not easy. It is complicated. And in past cases, when we didn't have this major situation, it took many, many years, and for good reason, because we have a due process and we want to make sure that it is done properly. So as diplomats do, we start with the interest and we work incrementally. Now, we may not have time to move slowly, and we are kind of writing it as we go, but we do need to send a message to Russia that this action is wholly unacceptable to us. And there are financial and other consequences for your actions that you have caused.
Madam Ambassador, any response? All right, well, let's do it.
Yeah.
No, all right. Do we have any takers in the audience right now? We got two. We'll wait for the microphone to come. These are some great questions here on Slido, folks. So we'll go, these first two, we'll collect them both. So please say your name, if any affiliation, and please just keep it short and brief so we can get to as many questions as possible, sir. Thank you.
My name is Jun Saito, University of Vienna, and my question is about the possible negotiation. The Swiss ambassador said to that this is the starting point for future possible negotiations involving both parties. But however, at first, as her Ambassador Khymynets pointed out, at first Russia is aggressor, and secondly, its president is sued by international criminal court. And in such a situation, how it is possible to negotiate, even in the future, with Russia?
Great. Thank you very much. Sir?
Well, my name is Guna Japiņa. I promote NATO membership of Ukraine and Austria, actually. And so the situation, the question is basically about NATO membership. Why this is not on the agenda? Because this war is ultimately about the Ukraine's future alliance status. Will it join NATO or not? So the moment we decide that this is a yes and a go in Washington, the war will be basically won on our side, and there's no reason to continue it. So that's really a big question why this is somehow avoided by this peace summit in neutral Switzerland of all places. I'm very much opposing that location because the symbolic is even terrible. And now let me add, we have now concluded a lot of these security agreements, individual, of the same NATO members, which are also NATO members. They give the security guarantee and billions of euros to Ukraine to win this war. And so where's the logic of all these things? And now this is a bit of a diversion, this peace summit, which is nice to have, yeah? But the ultimate way to win this war, to liberate Ukraine, is somehow not on the agenda, and NATO membership must be the center point of all these efforts. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, and best of luck with your goal of getting Austria into NATO. So let's unpack it. We'll start from the beginning. So, starting point, what do we think about negotiating with an aggressor to begin with? I mean, is this, flawed logic, or is this actually good that we're doing this in Switzerland, a country with a deep history of neutrality and facilitating a lot of very high-level conversations?
I'll just start, and I want to thank Switzerland, in fact, and I'm pleased that they have taken this initiative to host this summit. And the point was made, over 100 countries are coming at very senior levels to say, let's figure this out, and let's figure it out together. And that's how you begin. You divide, what your goals are, and you work methodically and carefully and hopefully quickly through a plan with a number of steps, as we have, as President Zelensky laid out, and you go through those steps carefully to come up with ways to get to peace. It is very hard to negotiate with someone who is an aggressor, who is committing atrocities, who has not respected and continues not to respect international law. But wars don't last forever, and there has to be a process and step by step a move towards peace. First, the humanitarian and then the violence and all of that. If we can find ways to demonstrate that this is the costs for Russia are too high, that's how you get on a path. But it's a long one. It's an arduous one. But we'll do it.
Madam Ambassador?
About negotiations with Russia. Sorry, but what would you like to negotiate about with Russia right now at this particular stage? Yes. And maybe may I paraphrase your question in my understanding, why is Russia not there in Bürgenstock? Because Russia did not want to be in Bürgenstock. And this is actually very clear position. What is the attitude of the aggressor in this part and this particular stage? Regarding the NATO and membership of Ukraine in NATO, let me just tell that today Riga is hosting the B9 summit. And there is also, let's say, communique or statement. And of course, we are just reiterating our common support for Ukraine. Let's say that, of course, Ukraine is one of the topic within the discussions within NATO also. But right now, to discuss membership of Ukraine in Bürgenstock, I would say it's much too early, because I understand it's like that the aim of the peace summit in Bürgenstock is to reach most or maximal agreement of something or about something. And those three topics, nuclear safety, navigation freedom, and food security, there are exactly those very broad topics that are, let's say, interesting for very many countries from different regions. NATO membership of Ukraine, let's talk about it maybe on the later stage. Do you agree, Ambassador?
Because NATO is one thing, but
and peace is actually food security, navigation freedom.
Because if we expect more than 100 countries to come for the participation, and all the topics are clear for everyone.
Yes.
So it's a broad discussion on principles. This is the main point. And NATO, there will be summit in
Washington?
In Washington.
July 10th.
It will be a good opportunity to discuss this topic at the summit.
Professor Schuett?
Absolutely, I'm agreed. I mean, if you go to these 10 points of President Zelensky's peace formula, as the ambassador did in the very beginning, as I said in a side talk earlier today, these based on legality and legitimacy, you go tick, 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 and say, look, there's nothing controversial in that formula. It conforms to legality and legitimacy, of course. And number 9, if I have it correctly, it speaks to the issue of security guarantees. And I think for every reasonable strategist or military planner or diplomat, it's knowing history of that very region and knowing the history of Russia. It's pretty much clear that security guarantees are necessary. Mm-hmm. Whether that leads to NATO and when is a different question. I would agree that it's too soon, but I don't think there is any greater doubt that this is what's needed for Ukraine. And then secondly, perhaps I wouldn't say it's sorry if I may, it's not. Bürgenstock is not nice to have. This is very much important to have this summit and try to get as many countries on board and try to begin this path to peace. Is it a long process? Of course, it will be a long process. But I think everything that comes out from the Swiss government is promising. Is a promising sign that they handle it quite well, I think.
So do we have any more hands here for questions before we get to some of the Slido questions? No students, extra marks. All right, so, and just one thing I think it's important to point out from the original question is, I mean, for anybody who's been following the news for the last month, I mean, Russia has been conducting a mass sub-threshold attacks across Europe with sabotage and whatnot. So it's kind of hard to negotiate with somebody who's actively at war with you. I'll open up some of the questions on Slido, and I'll do our best to get to them in the next 20 minutes. Here's a very interesting question from Anonymous. What would lead the Russian people to question Putin's course in Ukraine? Conscription for Muscovites? Travel ban for all Russians into Europe and North America? So thank you, whoever put it out there. So you want to take a...
Sorry, can you repeat it? Because I was trying to find it here, but it was my mistake. Sorry.
Right there.
It's $1 million question, because we see that the regime in Russia has not become more democratic, human, more respecting of international law during last decades, unfortunately. And I think that the current situation that the regime is able to do something like it does, it is not without support of society. And actually, this is a question of democracy. That democracy means responsibility. And here we are coming to maybe my conclusion that this war is not about, let's say, conflict between two parties. This war is about aggressor, which is standing against democracies. And this leads us to necessity to stick together, let's say, because democracy is something, it's not given.
It's not a right.
Yeah, exactly. But we can make it, and we can ensure it, and we can let it to be alive. How we can get the, let's say, Russian society, I don't know. I do hope that the people have, let's say, good potential to think and to act, but I'm not giving my 500 euros for that.
Well, let's hope we take billions.
Billion question.
Yeah. Mr. Ambassador?
Well, I'll just say, again, a difficult question to answer. I was in Ukraine as ambassador in 2014 when the Russians moved into Crimea, and then problems in Donbass as well, and they held these sham referenda where they had voting and guys with machine guns at the ballot boxes. So, and since then it has only gotten worse, where Russia has the Putin system has ratcheted the control, very intensely increased the narratives and counter narratives. So it would be it's very difficult to get a real sense of the feeling of the Russian population. And even if you could, that couldn't be expressed at this time. So that part is difficult. And it's true that they have, the Russians have suffered a lot of casualties through this aggression, and that, despite the narratives, you cannot explain away this. And so it is quite difficult for the Russian people. It's a terrible thing, mostly for Ukraine, for the world, and I hope that the people recognize this but the system of control is quite effective in Russia, and so it limits the ability of people to function.
Yeah, it is a great question, a difficult one, of course, and it really comes down to the question of central control, if you wish, of Russian society. And even if they are, I would also say that even if large parts of Russian populations is not only unhappy with how things go in Russia, how could they possibly express it? Putting it the other way around and bringing us back to an earlier discussion, my hunch is it makes more sense. Try to avoid the impression, which of course the Russian government will use in saying, look, this is a war the West wages against Russia. Russia as a country, Russia as a culture, blah blah blah. And rather pinpoint this maximum pressure that we can have through either financial means or legal means or diplomatic means, pinpoint it to those responsible in Russian politics and in the Russian military and in intelligence services as well, and leave society in a way out of it. What do you expect? I think it's very unlikely that we would see an uprising in a way. Very unfortunate, of course. But
I mean, a lot of work has gone in, right, to sort of setting all of Russians are getting their news from television, and it's this heavy doses of state propaganda with no dissent. So I think we take for granted sometimes the difficulty that people do believe this. We'll do one more round of questions if there's anybody else. So we'll do one last one here. So just state your name and affiliation, please.
My name is Mariana Grandic. I'm from the Human Rights Master for Human Rights at the University of Angewandte. I have a follow-up question. Why is nobody taking care of the thousands of Russians living in Europe or close to the Russian state that are opponents of Putin, and they want to have another Russia? And I think it would be necessary to get them organized for the time after, when the war is ending. And I think there would be a possibility to have sort of not peace negotiations, but a dialogue between these people and maybe Ukrainian people as well, because somehow they are on the same side.
Thank you. Any other last questions before we go back to the panelists? All right, Madam Ambassador, I want to start with you, given a lot of the Russian media that is now based in Latvia, which I'm sure you'll expand on. So
yes, we have quite a high concentration of Russian opposition media in Latvia. We are supporting, let's say, free media and freedom of expression. And actually, it's also, let's say, the point how we could, let's say, get the Russian population towards more democratic principles. It's actually availability of information. But we know exactly that actually for those who live in Russia right now, it's not possible because they are not available there. So, but actually, your question is very good one, and I think you have very correct way of thinking, but at the same time, I'm afraid this is wishful thinking, because I'm not specialist in Russian opposition abroad, not at all. Yeah, I don't know, maybe somebody is here from the audience, but so far as I have heard, so far as I know, there is no consolidated Russian opposition.
Them to find a platform or something. I know there are so many single artists, intellectuals, all of that, and I mean to form or to support them to forming a maybe another vision of Russia, I mean, for example. Yeah.
I think that exactly the answer to your question hides in this, within the question. If we are talking about the Russians who live abroad, let's say in free world, it means they have possibility to act, they have freedom of expression, and they have also, let's say, examples of those countries where they live in. They are responsible for their own countries. They are Russian citizens. Let decide them what they want from their own country.
They expect someone to come, yes, and act. They have everything what they need. They have for act. What my colleague said. That's why, for example, 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, there was a meeting of Russian, let's call it opposition in Ukraine. But they have to decide how active they want to work.
We cannot, let's say, organize or establish, let's say, just theoretically, NGO for Russians, supporting them to think about their own country.
One answer. I was organizing a forum for former Yugoslavia because people did not know each other well, and they have not been organized from Serbia, Croatia, Kosovo, wherever. And we have been putting all these people together in we called it Verona Forum, and that was the only dialogue that was possible to look what will happen after the war in former Yugoslavia. And many of these people have been then in the governments in Serbia, Croatia, I mean, after the war. So just to give you another example, you know.
We're on a very tight timeline. Sorry about that. You're coming in a bit late, but we have one last question here before the opening remarks, before the closing remarks, if it is on the other side there.
It's me. Sorry. I'm just like not a question. It's just like something to say back to what you said. I'm Russian. I'm living abroad. I have been living for years. I studied in Canada, I lived in Germany, and what I can say, I also participated in the film Navalny, and I'm scared. Yeah, so I mean, like many Russians who, yeah, so like in the film also we showed how like the Russians, they are not only, not only aggressive to foreigners, they are aggressive to their own people, and it's also now in newspapers that they are targeting journalists in Latvia, in any other countries. It's like, it's a mess at the moment, but it's work in progress. I hope, yeah, so like somehow we will be better organized. Yeah, so. I just don't know. I think that people are scared.
Well, thank you, so much for sharing your personal experiences on it. As you said, right? I mean, yeah.
I wanted to say, but yeah, so.
I mean, even at Munich Security Conference, right? I mean, they're not speaking with one voice, and even the head of Navalny's office was, brutally beaten in Vilnius. So it's a work in progress, and it's still a new experience. There must be order, ordnung muss sein. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have 5 minutes. So we're going to go to the closing comments. So we've covered a lot of different issues. We've had the outline from the ambassador about what to look forward to, why it's important it's being in Switzerland. We started with you, Madam Ambassador, so I'll come back to you again. Any final comments before we sign off this evening?
Some people say, or told to me, that actually we are afraid. Maybe the success of the summit will be not there. Maybe the summit will fail or something like that. I said, my answer was no way. Because actually the aim, the purpose, the mission of the summit, let's say, is so low, just to start the process. Yeah, those very complicated topics and questions about NATO and so on, they will come on the later stage. But now it's important just to start the process, and the process will be started. And I'm very happy that so many high-level delegations will arrive. In Latvian case, we will have, let's say, both state president and our foreign minister. And we will participate in the human aspect breakout session, but we have something, other topics also, let's say, in mind, but this is the main one, because we are, our focus is on the Ukrainian children. There was an international conference in January this week in Riga, so we are ready to participate, to bring our added value. Please follow those who are ready to participate and go there, and the mission will be there, and the task will be fulfilled, no doubts about it. So thank you again to Switzerland for hosting this.
A little bit of optimism before some food, Dr. Schuett?
Yeah, thanks. I would say also, speaking to this event theme, Ukraine's 10-point peace formula, power or powerless, that was the question. From my point of view, it seems quite clear to me that it's I would call it a powerful path. A path, nothing more, nothing less, but it's important. It's a path towards peace, and Switzerland gives the international community a chance to again lay out these 10 points, focus on 3 in particular, which makes sense, and tell the international community that the plan itself carries everything. It carries legality, all these 10 points, and the morality in terms of legitimacy. And I think that's why Switzerland is so important. And when the Russians say, or propagandists say, look, it's a joke because we are not, that's the joke. I mean, it's the responsibility is on them, on Russia and its friends, and not on Switzerland. It's great that they're hosting this, and I hope it'll be a success, and I'm fairly positive it will be a success.
So, Mr. Ambassador, we're on our power path now to Switzerland. Take us home.
Great. Thanks so much. I think the meeting will be very positive, very constructive. On nuclear, Russia moved in and took Chernobyl, and then after they withdrew, and then they took Zaporizhzhia, which is the largest operating nuclear power station in Europe. And we in the international community have been very loud, vociferous critiques of what Russia has done. And everyone in the world knows this is wholly unacceptable. Everyone in the world recognizes that they have not only put Ukraine in danger and themselves in danger, but Europe. And so having nuclear in the summit process is fantastic. And as the Ukrainian ambassador mentioned, focusing on the return of Ukrainian children who have been deported to Russia in the thousands. This is a very, very important measure, and everyone who learns about this file and knows this file recognizes how egregious this action is, and so we can work collectively towards steps to fix this situation in the interests of the children, offer that post-return support and the things that they need. But critically important issues that are right now confronting us are going to be addressed at the summit. I would also say, we talked a little bit about food security. African countries were phenomenally panicked when the war happened, because they rely on Ukraine and Russia for food, for survival. And so it shows how much the war has had a global impact on people's lives and will continue to do so. We are wholly interconnected, and having over 100 countries that come together to talk about this gives us a lot of ability to try to affect change in a positive way.
Well, I couldn't have said it any better. So for everybody, please give our panelists a wonderful round of applause. It was really great. Transatlantic point of view. we'd like to invite everybody now for a networking cocktail. I deeply apologize that we weren't able to get to all of the questions. There were some hot takes out there, which I hope we can discuss over a glass of wine. Most importantly, an event like this does not get put together with a lot of team effort. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your team. But for everybody at the DA, Deputy Director, Director Brix, Sibyl, who's hiding behind there, she's been phenomenal with it. Our policy rapporteur, Benjamin, who's in the stage right now, if Ben's out there. But I need to give a huge shout out to the OG organizing committee. So Victoria and Victor, amazing work for everybody. So thank you. So let's give everybody a round of applause and Slava Ukraina.